I never thought I would be the kind of man who was afraid of a conversation. Not a fight. Not pain. Not even loss. But that night, sitting alone in my car with the engine turned off, staring at my childhood home, I felt something I had never felt before. Fear. Not the loud kind. Not panic. The quiet kind that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I was there to confront my father. A man who had raised me. A man who had provided for me. A man I thought I knew. But I didn't know him. Not really. And what he confessed that night didn't just change how I saw him. It changed how I saw myself. It changed how I understood love, silence, and the damage men passed down without meaning to. I sat there for a long time. My hands rested on the steering wheel, stiff, like they didn't belong to me anymore. The house looked the same. Same porch light. Same curtains. Same quiet street where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. That was the lie I grew up believing. That nothing bad had happened here. The truth was buried so deep that even my father had learned to live on top of it. I didn't come there angry. I didn't come there shouting. I came there tired. Tired of carrying questions that never had answers. Tired of feeling like something in my life never quite fit, no matter how hard I tried. I had reached an age where excuses stopped working, where silence started to feel heavier than the truth. I opened the car door and stepped out. The night air felt cold on my face. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world didn't stop, even when your life was about to change forever. Every step toward the front door felt slower than the last. As I walked, memories came back without asking permission. My father standing in the kitchen early in the morning, already dressed for work. My father sitting quietly at the dinner table, listening more than talking. My father fixing things around the house without ever asking for help. He was always there, but somehow, he was never fully present. Growing up, I thought that was normal. Men were quiet. Men were distant. Men didn't talk about feelings. That's what I was taught, not with words, but with example. My mother tried to fill the silence. She talked enough for both of them. She asked questions my father answered with nods. She laughed to soften the edges. She loved loudly, like she was trying to make up for something missing. I didn't understand it then. As a child, you don't question the shape of your home. You just live inside it. But as I got older, cracks started to show. My father never talked about his childhood. Not once. Not stories. Not memories. Nothing. When people asked, he would smile politely and change the subject. If someone pushed, he would excuse himself and step outside. I noticed it, but I didn't push either. I became like him in that way, avoiding hard conversations, keeping things inside, telling myself that silence was strength. That silence followed me into adulthood, into relationships, into fatherhood, and one day, I realized I was becoming a man I didn't fully understand. That's when the questions started to hurt. The first time I asked my father directly about his past, it was years earlier. Casual. Light. Sitting in the living room during a holiday visit. "Dad, what was your father like?" He froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. Then he smiled. A small, careful smile. "He was a hard-working man," he said. That was it. No emotion. No detail. Just a sentence that felt practiced, like it had been used many times before. I let it go. But the question stayed with me. As time passed, I noticed patterns. My father's sudden anger at small things. His discomfort with affection. The way he pulled away when emotions got too close. I saw those same patterns in myself. And that scared me more than anything. The moment that finally pushed me to that front door happened months before that night. I had yelled at my own son. Not screamed. Not violently. But sharply enough that his face changed. His eyes dropped. His shoulders tensed. And suddenly, I was looking at myself through my child's eyes. I saw confusion. Fear. Distance. I remembered that look. I had worn it once. That night, after my son went to bed, I sat alone and felt something break open inside me. I realized that whatever my father carried, whatever he never spoke about, it had not stopped with him. It had reached me. And unless I faced it, it would reach my son too. That's when I decided I needed the truth. Not to blame. Not to accuse. But to understand. I knocked on the door. My father opened it slowly, like he already knew why I was there. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. His hair was thinner. His shoulders slightly hunched. Time had softened him, but it had also exposed something fragile underneath. He smiled when he saw me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded. A habit I learned from him. "Can we talk?" I said. He stepped aside without asking questions. We sat in the living room. The same couch. The same lamp. The same silence. He waited. That's when I realized something painful. My father had been waiting his whole life. The house that taught us silence. My father didn't speak right away. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes focused somewhere just past my shoulder. I had seen that look before. It was the same look he wore whenever a conversation moved too close to something real. So I started talking instead. I told him about my son. About the night I raised my voice. About the way it stayed with me longer than it should have. I told him I was afraid. Afraid of becoming distant. Afraid of repeating something I didn't understand. He listened without interrupting. No nods. No expressions. Just listening. That was always his way. As he sat there, my mind drifted back to the house I grew up in. Not this one. The first one. The one we lived in before I turned 10. The one that lived quietly in my memory like an unfinished sentence. It wasn't a bad house. Not on the outside. White siding. Small front yard. A porch swing that never got used. Neighbors waved. People smiled. From the street, it looked like a normal family lived there. Inside, everything was clean. Too clean. Like messes weren't allowed to exist. My mother kept things neat, but it was more than that. It felt like she was trying to control something invisible. Like if everything stayed in its place, nothing bad could break through. My father came home at the same time every day. He hung his jacket in the same spot. Washed his hands. Sat down. Dinner followed the same routine. We talked about school. About work. About weather. We never talked about feelings. If I cried, my mother comforted me quietly. If I got angry, my father would look at me with disappointment rather than anger. That look stayed with me longer than any punishment could have. I learned early that emotions made people uncomfortable, so I stopped showing them. My father wasn't cruel. He never hit us. He never called us names. But he also never said, "I'm proud of you." Never said, "I love you," unless my mother prompted him. And when he did say it, it sounded foreign, like a word from another language. As a boy, I told myself he was just tired. He worked hard. Long hours. Early mornings. I respected him for that. But respect isn't the same as closeness. I remember one night when I was about 12. I had a school project due, and I was struggling. I asked my father for help. He sat beside me at the table, looked at the paper, and went quiet. After a moment, he stood up. "You'll figure it out," he said. Then he walked away. I finished it alone. Not because I wanted to, but because I had learned not to ask twice. Moments like that stacked up quietly over the years. Small things. Missed chances. Words unsaid. And still, I loved him. That's the confusing part. You can love someone deeply and still feel lonely in their presence. I became an adult carrying that confusion like an old coat. It didn't fit well, but it was familiar. When I left home, I promised myself I would be different. I would talk more, feel more, be present. But life has a way of pulling you back into patterns you don't even realize you learned. I worked long hours too. I came home tired. I answered questions instead of asking them. I fixed things instead of listening. And one day, I saw my father's reflection in the mirror. That's when I knew I had to understand where it all began. Sitting across from him now, I felt that old child inside me. The one still waiting for answers. "Dad," I said quietly, "why don't you ever talk about your childhood?" He took a breath. Slow. Heavy. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "It matters to me," I replied. He looked down at his hands. They were rough. Scarred. Hands that had built things. Fixed things. Protected things. Hands that had never known how to hold feelings. "My father wasn't an easy man," he said. That was more than he had ever said before. I waited. "He believed boys needed to be tough," my father continued. No excuses. No weakness. The room felt smaller. "He worked all the time," my father said. "When he was home, he expected silence. Order. Respect." I nodded. The words felt familiar. If I cried, he said, he would ignore me. If I talked back, he would punish me. Not always with his hands. Sometimes with his absence. My father paused. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was shaking. "I learned early that love was something you earned," he said, "and that you could lose it easily." I swallowed hard. For the first time, I saw my father not as the man who raised me, but as a boy who had learned to survive. He looked up at me then. "I didn't know how to give you what I never had," he said. That sentence stayed with me. I wanted to tell him I understood. I wanted to tell him I forgave him. But the truth was, I didn't know how to feel yet. Because this was only the beginning. The boy my father used to be. My father leaned back in his chair, like the weight of the past had suddenly found him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full, heavy with things that had waited years to be said. "I don't tell these stories," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He rubbed his hands together, slow and nervous. I had never seen him nervous before. It made him seem older, but also more human. "I grew up in a small house," he began. "Smaller than this one. 3 rooms. No privacy. No quiet." His voice stayed calm, but his eyes didn't move. They were fixed somewhere far away. "My father believed children were meant to be seen, not heard," he said. "Especially boys." I could picture it too easily. The kind of house where footsteps made you tense, where the sound of a door opening meant you had to be careful with your words. "He wasn't a bad man in his own mind," my father continued. "He provided. He kept food on the table. He thought that was enough." I nodded. I had heard that logic before. But when he drank, my father said, he became quieter, colder, like the warmth left the room. That caught my attention. "You never mentioned drinking," I said. He gave a small smile. Not a happy one. "There are many things I never mentioned," he said. "As a boy, my father learned to read moods the way some kids learn to read books. He knew when to stay out of sight, when to speak, when to disappear. I learned how to be invisible," he said. "It kept me safe." Invisible. The word echoed in my mind. I thought about how often my father faded into the background at family gatherings. How he stood near walls. How he watched instead of joined. It wasn't distance. It was survival. "My mother tried," he said. "But she was tired. She was afraid too." Afraid of what? He didn't say. "There were nights," my father continued, "when I lay awake listening. Waiting. Not knowing what kind of man would come through the door." His voice dropped lower. "I learned not to cry," he said, "because crying made it worse." I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to interrupt, to ask questions, but something told me not to break the rhythm. This was fragile, like glass. "When I left home," he said, "I promised myself I would never be like him." I almost laughed at the irony. Almost. "I worked hard," he said. "I stayed sober. I followed rules. I kept control." Control. That was the word. "But control isn't the same as love," he said softly. I thought of all the moments he had stayed calm when emotion was needed most. "Did you ever feel happy back then?" I asked. He thought about it. "Sometimes," he said, "when I was alone." That answer hurt more than I expected. "When I met your mother," he continued, "she felt like light. She talked. She laughed. She asked questions." I smiled. That sounded like her. "She wanted closeness," he said. "I wanted safety." The room grew quiet again. "I thought if I built a stable life, the rest would come naturally," he said. "I didn't know that feelings don't grow in silence." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I see now," he said, "that I passed down more than I meant to." I felt tears rise, but I kept my voice steady. "So did I said. That's when he closed his eyes. The night that never left him. My father kept his eyes closed for a long time. Long enough that I wondered if he had gone somewhere I couldn't follow. When he finally opened them, they looked tired. Not from age, but from memory. "There's something I never told anyone," he said. The room felt still, like it was holding its breath. "Not your mother," he added. "Not you. Not even myself. Not fully." I leaned forward slightly, careful not to rush him. "It happened when I was 16, he said. "Old enough to think I understood the world. Young enough to be completely wrong." He took a slow breath. "My father lost his job," he said. "The drinking got worse after that. Louder. Meaner. More unpredictable." I could hear it in his voice now. Not fear. Something deeper. Guilt. "One night," he continued, "he came home later than usual. I was sitting at the table. My mother was in the bedroom. My father paused, swallowing hard. He started yelling, he said. About the house. About money. About respect. I didn't interrupt. I barely breathed. I said something, my father admitted. I don't even remember what. Just something small. Something honest. He shook his head slowly. That was my mistake, he said. The way he said it told me everything about the rules he had grown up with. He came toward me, my father said. And for the first time, I didn't move out of the way. My hands tightened into fists without me realizing it. I stood there, he said, and I looked at him. My father's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He hit me, he said, harder than he ever had before. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a mix of anger and sadness, tangled together. I fell, my father said. I remember the floor. Cold. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. He rubbed his jaw absent-mindedly, like his body remembered before his mind did. My mother came running, he said. She screamed. He turned on her. My stomach dropped. I got up, my father said. I don't know how. Something in me snapped. He looked down at his hands again. I pushed him, he said. Just once. The room seemed to tilt. He fell, my father continued. Hit his head on the corner of the table. Silence. I didn't mean to, my father said. I swear I didn't. My throat felt tight. I couldn't find words. He didn't get up, my father said. I stared at him, my heart pounding. My mother was crying, he said, shaking him, calling his name. My father closed his eyes again. He was alive, he said. Barely, but alive. An ambulance came. Police came. Questions came. They called it an accident, my father said. Self-defense. But the way he said it told me that was not how it felt to him. He survived, my father said. But he was never the same. The drinking stopped. The anger dulled. But something in my father's father was gone. And something in me broke too, my father said. He looked at me, eyes filled with a quiet pain I had never seen before. I learned that night, he said, that love could turn dangerous. That closeness could destroy. I understood then. That night didn't just shape his childhood. It shaped his silence, his distance, his fear of emotion. I left home not long after, he said. I didn't look back. I sat there, trying to process it all. That was his dark past. Not cruelty, not evil, but trauma wrapped in guilt. And suddenly, so much made sense. After my father finished telling me what happened that night, neither of us spoke for a long time. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Slow, steady, like it always had. I wondered how many times that same sound had filled this room while he sat alone with memories he never shared. I looked at him differently now. Not as the distant man I grew up with. Not as the quiet father who struggled to say, I love you. But as a boy who learned too early that closeness could turn violent, and that silence could feel safer than truth. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. I thought if I kept everything under control, he said, nothing like that night could ever happen again. Control. That word followed him everywhere. He controlled his temper. He controlled his schedule. He controlled his emotions so tightly that nothing could escape. And when he met my mother, that control looked like stability. My mother came from a very different home. She grew up with noise, with arguments that ended in apologies, with doors slammed and then opened again, with people who said what they felt, even if it was messy. When she met my father, she saw safety. She saw a man who didn't drink, who worked hard, who didn't raise his voice, who listened more than he spoke. She didn't see the walls yet. At first, those walls felt like strength. My father provided. He showed up. He stayed. He never disappeared the way his own father had. But he also never fully let anyone in. He loved my mother in the way he knew how. Through responsibility. Through consistency. Through silence. He believed that if he could give her a peaceful home, that would be enough. And for a while, it almost was. But love needs more than peace. It needs presence. Growing up, I remember how my mother would try to pull him into moments. She would touch his arm when she laughed. She would ask him how he felt about things. She would encourage him to talk. Sometimes he tried. Sometimes he would give short answers. And sometimes, when emotions came too close, he would shut down completely. I remember the look on my mother's face during those moments. Confusion, hurt, and then acceptance. She learned, slowly, not to push too hard. And that's how the house learned to be quiet. Not tense. Not angry. Just quiet. We didn't fight much. We didn't shout. We didn't argue loudly. But we also didn't talk deeply. Everything stayed on the surface. If I was sad, my mother comforted me. If I was scared, she stayed close. My father watched from a distance, unsure of how to enter those moments. I don't think he didn't care. I think he cared too much, and that scared him. Because caring meant vulnerability. And vulnerability, to him, still felt dangerous. As a child, I didn't understand any of this. I just felt it. I felt the space between us. I felt the things he never said. I felt the way conversations stopped before they reached anything important. So I learned from him. I learned how to hide feelings behind calmness. How to change the subject when things got uncomfortable. How to stay busy instead of present. By the time I became a teenager, my father and I spoke mostly about practical things. School, work, responsibilities. Never fears. Never doubts. Never pain. I remember once, when I was about 16, feeling overwhelmed by life. School pressure, friendships, the confusion of becoming someone I didn't fully understand yet. I sat in my room one night, staring at the wall, feeling like I was carrying something heavy inside my chest. I wanted to talk to him. I walked into the living room. He was sitting in his chair, reading. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to begin. "Dad," I said. He looked up. "Yes." I hesitated. "I don't know. I've just been feeling off lately." He studied me for a moment. I could see him thinking, searching for the right response. "You'll be fine," he said finally. "Everyone feels that way sometimes." Then he went back to reading. I stood there for another moment. Then I turned and walked away. He didn't do anything wrong, but he didn't do what I needed either. That moment taught me something important. It taught me not to ask again. So I handled things on my own. I learned how to carry weight quietly, how to solve problems internally, how to keep emotions from showing. And by the time I became a man, I was very good at it. Too good. When I met my wife, she reminded me of my mother. Warm, open, emotional. She talked about feelings easily. She wanted connection. She wanted honesty. At first, I gave it to her. Or at least, I tried. But when life got stressful, when responsibilities grew, when pressure built, I retreated into what I knew. Silence, control, distance. I didn't mean to. It just happened. And when we became parents, those patterns followed me again. I loved my son deeply. I worked hard for him. I provided. I protected. But when he cried, when he struggled, when he needed emotional closeness, I sometimes froze. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to respond without feeling exposed. The night I raised my voice at him, the night that pushed me to confront my father, didn't come from anger. It came from fear. Fear that I was failing. Fear that I didn't know how to be what he needed. Fear that I was repeating something broken. That's why sitting across from my father now felt so important. Because for the first time, I could see the full picture. I could see how one night, decades ago, had shaped a man's entire way of loving. I could see how trauma doesn't disappear just because time passes. It hides. It adapts. It teaches. My father looked at me after a long pause. "I thought staying quiet would keep everyone safe," he said. "I thought if I never lost control, nothing bad would happen." I nodded slowly. "But what I didn't understand," he continued, "is that silence can hurt too." That sentence hit me harder than anything else he had said. Because it was true. Silence had hurt him. Silence had hurt my mother. Silence had hurt me. And silence had almost hurt my son. My father sighed. "I see now," he said, "that I taught you how to survive, but not how to feel." I swallowed hard. "And I did the same," I said. We sat there together, two men connected by blood, history, and unspoken pain. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at him. I felt compassion. He had done the best he could with what he had. And now, I had a choice. I could carry those walls forward, or I could learn how to take them down. But understanding the past was only the beginning. Because what came next forced me to face not just who my father was, but who I had already become. After that night at my father's house, I went home carrying more than answers. I carried a mirror. Every word he said followed me. Every silence I suddenly understood. It felt like someone had turned a light on inside a room I had lived in my whole life without noticing the walls. At first, I told myself nothing had changed. I went to work. I came home. I helped with dinner. I played with my son. From the outside, my life still looked steady. But inside, something had cracked open. I started noticing moments I had ignored before. Small things. Quiet things. The way my wife would look at me when I answered with one word instead of a sentence. The way she stopped asking certain questions because she already knew the answer would be silence. I noticed how often I escaped into work. Not because I loved it so much, but because it gave me a reason not to feel. Work was safe. Work had rules. Work didn't ask me to open my heart. Home did. My wife never accused me. That's the part that hurts the most when I think about it. She never yelled. She never called me cold. She just grew tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight alone. Tired of reaching for someone who stayed just out of reach. Tired of feeling like she was married to a man who was physically present but emotionally distant. One night, after our son had gone to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "We need to talk," she said. Those words made my chest tighten. Not because I didn't care, but because talking felt dangerous. "Okay," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding how honest she was allowed to be. "I feel lonely," she said. I wanted to argue. I wanted to list all the ways I showed up, all the things I did, all the responsibilities I carried. But I didn't, because I knew she wasn't wrong. I don't feel like I really know what's going on inside you, she continued. And sometimes, I don't think you do either. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She sighed, not angry, just tired. I don't need you to fix everything, she said. I just need you to be here. With me. I nodded. Another habit I learned from my father. I am here, I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true in the way she needed. That conversation didn't end with shouting. It didn't end with tears. It ended with distance. And distance, I was good at. Over the next few months, the space between us grew quietly. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough that you could feel it if you paid attention. I told myself things would get better. That stress would pass. That time would fix it. That's what my father had always believed. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late. I had worked longer than usual. When I came home, the house was dark except for a light in the living room. My wife was sitting on the couch, awake, waiting. My stomach dropped. We need to talk again, she said. I sat down slowly. I can't keep doing this, she said. I feel like I'm disappearing in this marriage. Her voice was calm. That scared me more than anger ever could. I love you, she said, but I don't feel connected to you anymore. I felt panic rise in my chest. I don't know how to be different, I admitted. That was the most honest thing I had said in a long time. She nodded slowly. I know, she said. And that's the problem. The word problem echoed in my head. She wasn't threatening to leave. She wasn't making demands. She was telling me the truth. And the truth was simple. My silence was costing me my family. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up alone, sitting in the dark, thinking about my father, about his father, about the long line of men who thought survival was the same as love. I realized something painful. I had spent my life avoiding emotional danger, only to create a different kind of harm. I thought distance would protect everyone. Instead, it was slowly destroying everything that mattered. A few days later, something happened with my son that I can still see clearly. He was upset about something small, a broken toy, a disappointment that felt big to him. He came to me, eyes wet, voice shaking. Normally, I would have tried to distract him, fix the toy, change the subject. But this time, I remembered my father at the table. The way he walked away. I knelt down in front of my son. What's wrong? I asked. He looked surprised, like he wasn't used to the question. As he spoke, I listened, really listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush him. And something unexpected happened. I felt uncomfortable. My chest tightened. My instinct told me to pull away. But I stayed. When he finished, I hugged him. Not quickly, not awkwardly, just held him. And in that moment, I felt something I had avoided my whole life. Vulnerability. It didn't break me. It didn't make me weak. It made me present. That night, after my son went to bed, I cried quietly in the bathroom. Not from sadness alone, but from realization. I had spent so many years believing feelings were dangerous, but avoiding them was far more destructive. That's when I knew I couldn't fix this alone. I started therapy, saying that still feels strange. My father never believed in it. Neither did I. At first, I didn't know what to say. I talked about work, about responsibilities, about facts. The therapist waited. Eventually, the silence became uncomfortable. And then the words came. About my father, about my childhood, about fear, about guilt. I learned something important during those sessions. I wasn't broken. I was trained. Trained to survive. Trained to stay quiet. Trained to keep control at all costs. And training can be unlearned. Slowly, painfully, awkwardly, I began to practice saying how I felt. Not perfectly, not consistently, but honestly. I talked to my wife. Really talked. I told her I was scared, that I didn't know how to do this, that I was trying. She listened. That didn't fix everything overnight. Trust doesn't work that way, but it opened a door. And once a door opens, walls don't feel as permanent anymore. Still, something remained unfinished. I had confronted my father. I had understood him. I had begun changing myself. But there was one more truth waiting. One final realization that would reshape how I saw forgiveness, responsibility, and the quiet power of breaking a cycle. And it would come from my father, when I least expected it. I didn't plan to see my father again so soon. After that first long night, after everything he told me, I thought we both needed time. Time to sit with the truth. Time to breathe around it. Time to let old memories settle back into their places. But life doesn't wait for comfort. A few weeks later, my phone rang early in the morning. It was my mother. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "Your father isn't feeling well," she said. "He asked for you." I drove there with a tight feeling in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like instinct. The kind that tells you something important is about to happen. When I arrived, he was sitting at the kitchen table. The same table where we had talked before. But he looked different now. Older. Thinner. Like the effort of opening the past had taken more out of him than he expected. He smiled when he saw me. "Sit," he said. I did. My mother made us coffee and quietly left the room. She didn't ask questions. She never did. I realized then how long she had lived alongside things she didn't fully understand, respecting a silence she never created. My father stared into his cup for a long time. "There's more," he said. The words landed heavily. "I thought there might be," I replied. He nodded slowly. "What I told you before," he said, "that night when I was 16, that wasn't the end of it." I felt my shoulders tense. "After my father fell," he continued, "and after everything settled down, I was told I had done the right thing, that it was self-defense, that I had protected my mother." He paused. "Everyone said it," he added. "Police, doctors, family. But you didn't believe it," I said quietly. He looked up at me, eyes tired but clear. "No," he said. "I didn't." He took a deep breath. "Because part of me didn't just want him to stop," he said. "Part of me wanted him to feel what I had felt my whole life." The honesty of that statement hit me hard. "I never told anyone that," he said. "Not even myself, really." The room felt heavy again, but this time it wasn't fear I felt. It was understanding. "I lived my life believing that wanting him to suffer made me dangerous," my father said. "So I spent the rest of my life trying to prove I wasn't." He tried to be gentle, controlled, contained. "I thought if I never let myself feel anger again," he said, "I could keep that part of me locked away." He looked at his hands. "But anger doesn't disappear," he said. "It just finds new shapes. Silence. Distance. Withdrawal." I thought about how often he had shut down instead of speaking up. How often he had walked away instead of leaning in. "That night didn't just teach me fear," he continued. "It taught me shame. Shame for feeling anger. Shame for wanting justice. Shame for surviving. I convinced myself I didn't deserve closeness," he said. "Because closeness had once turned me into someone I didn't recognize." I felt my eyes sting. "You didn't turn into a monster," I said. He gave a small, sad smile. "I know that now," he said. "But I didn't then." We sat quietly for a moment. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "Because I see you," he said. "And I see how hard you're trying not to become someone you're afraid of." That broke something open inside me. "I see you fighting yourself," he continued. "Just like I did." He leaned forward slightly. "And I don't want you to waste as much time as I did." The honesty between us felt fragile, but real. "I thought being a good man meant never losing control," he said. "But I see now that being a good man means learning how to feel without letting it destroy you." I nodded. "I was wrong," he said. "About a lot of things." That sentence alone felt like a gift. "I thought love was something you showed by staying steady," he said. "But love also needs warmth. It needs words. It needs courage." Courage. I had never heard my father use that word in relation to feelings. "I wasn't brave enough," he said. "Not with your mother. Not with you." My throat tightened. "You were brave in other ways," I said. He shook his head gently. "Bravery that hides isn't bravery," he said. "It's fear wearing responsibility as a disguise." That sentence stayed with me. "I can't change the way I raised you," he said. "But I can tell you this now." He looked directly at me. "You are not dangerous for feeling," he said. "And you don't have to punish yourself for surviving." I felt tears fall freely then. I didn't wipe them away. My father watched quietly. "That part of you that feels deeply," he continued. "That's not weakness. That's what I was afraid of, because I never learned how to hold it." I thought about my son, about holding him while he cried, about staying present through discomfort. "I'm trying to learn," I said. He nodded. "That's all any of us can do," he replied. My mother came back into the room then. She sensed the shift without needing words. She put her hand on my father's shoulder. "I'm glad you're talking," she said softly. He reached up and held her hand. A simple gesture, one I had rarely seen. "I should have done this years ago," he said. She smiled gently. "We're doing it now," she replied. I realized then how much healing can happen late in life. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. Before I left, my father said one last thing. "I spent my life afraid of what was inside me," he said. "But watching you try to be different, it showed me that the cycle doesn't end by denying the past." He paused. "It ends by facing it." As I drove home, his words stayed with me. I thought about how many generations had lived quietly, carrying pain they never named. How much damage silence could do when passed down like an inheritance. And I understood something important. Confronting my father hadn't changed my past, but it had changed my future. Still, the hardest part wasn't understanding him. The hardest part was forgiving myself. And that was the journey that lay ahead. After that second conversation with my father, something shifted inside me. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was quieter than that. It felt like a weight I had carried for so long that I didn't notice it was there, until it began to lift. But relief didn't come right away. What came first was guilt. A deep, uncomfortable guilt that settled in my chest and refused to leave. Because once I understood my father, once I saw the boy he had been and the fear he had carried, I could no longer pretend I didn't see myself clearly. Understanding him meant understanding me. And that meant facing the ways I had hurt the people I loved, not out of cruelty, but out of absence. That kind of guilt is hard to explain. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It just sits with you, quietly asking questions you can't ignore. How many moments had I missed because I didn't know how to stay present? How many times had my wife felt alone while standing right next to me? How many small wounds had I caused by choosing silence instead of honesty? I wanted to forgive my father for what he couldn't give me, but forgiving myself felt much harder, because I had known better. Or at least, I thought I should have. That inner conflict followed me everywhere. I noticed it in the way I spoke more slowly, like I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I noticed it in the way I washed my wife's face carefully now, trying to read emotions I had ignored for years. I noticed it most when I was alone. Late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I would sit in the dark and replay moments from my life. Not the big ones. The small ones. The nights I chose work over conversation. The times I dismissed my wife's feelings with logic instead of empathy. The moments my son looked at me, waiting, and I didn't fully show up. I wasn't punishing myself on purpose, but I was holding myself accountable in a way I never had before. And accountability hurts. My therapist once said something that stayed with me. You can understand where behavior comes from and still take responsibility for its impact. That sentence felt heavy at first. I had spent so long explaining myself internally, excusing my distance, telling myself I was doing my best. But doing your best doesn't erase the pain caused along the way. And yet, blaming myself endlessly wouldn't heal anything either. So I had to learn a new skill. Self-forgiveness. It didn't come naturally. Forgiving others felt easier. Forgiving myself felt like letting myself off the hook. But I was wrong. Self-forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about accepting responsibility without letting shame define me. That lesson came slowly, through small moments. One night, my wife and I sat on the couch after our son had gone to bed. We weren't arguing. We weren't fixing anything. We were just sitting together. I turned to her and said something I had never said before. "I know I haven't been easy to be married to," I said. She looked at me, surprised by the honesty. "I'm trying," I continued. "But I know trying doesn't erase the past. And I don't expect you to forget anything." She stayed quiet for a moment. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said. "I just need you to be real." Real. That word stayed with me. Being real meant being imperfect in front of someone else. It meant allowing myself to be seen, even when I didn't like what I saw. It meant saying things like, "I'm scared. I don't know. I need help." Words my father never learned how to say. Words I was learning now, slowly, awkwardly, like a second language. There were days I failed. Days when I retreated into silence again. Days when stress pulled me back into old habits. Days when my wife's disappointment was quiet but unmistakable. And each time, I had a choice. I could shut down in shame, or I could acknowledge it and try again. Trying again was harder, because trying again meant staying open even after failure. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I snapped at my wife over something small. The look on her face was immediate. Hurt. Tired. In the past, I would have withdrawn. Let the silence stretch. Let time smooth it over. This time, I didn't. I took a breath. "I'm sorry," I said. "That wasn't fair. I'm overwhelmed, but that's not your fault." The words felt strange in my mouth. Exposed. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that. she replied. That moment didn't fix everything, but it mattered, because it showed her something important. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was learning how to repair instead of retreat. That skill, repair, was something my family had never practiced. Mistakes were avoided, not addressed. Hurt was ignored, not healed. I was doing something new. Not perfectly, but intentionally. My relationship with my son changed too. I became more attentive to his emotions, not just his behavior. When he was upset, I stayed with him longer. When he asked questions, I didn't rush to answers. When he was quiet, I didn't assume everything was fine. One night, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad," he said, "were you ever scared when you were a kid?" I paused. In the past, I might have deflected, changed the subject, protected an image. This time, I told the truth. "Yes," I said. "I was." He looked at me thoughtfully. "What were you scared of?" I took another breath. "I was scared of not knowing how to talk about things," I said. "And I don't want you to feel that way." He nodded, like that made sense to him. That moment felt like a small victory, not because I had done everything right, but because I had done something honest. Still, forgiveness didn't arrive all at once. There were nights I lay awake, thinking about my father, about the years he lost to silence, about the love he felt but couldn't express. I wondered how different his life might have been if someone had helped him earlier, if someone had told him he wasn't broken. Then I realized something important. I was giving myself the chance he never had, and that came with responsibility. Because breaking a cycle isn't just about understanding it. It's about choosing differently, again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable. My father and I began talking more after that. Not daily, not deeply every time, but honestly. Sometimes we spoke about the past, sometimes about nothing at all. One afternoon, he surprised me by saying, "I'm proud of you." The words felt unfamiliar, heavy, emotional. "Thank you," I said. "I don't say that enough," he added. I smiled softly. "I know," I replied. There was no bitterness in that moment, just truth. As time passed, I realized something else. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It changes how memory lives inside you. My past didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling my future. I still struggled. I still felt fear. I still made mistakes. But I no longer believed those things defined me. They were signals, reminders, opportunities to choose differently. The man I had become wasn't something I needed to run from. He was someone I needed to understand. And once I did that, I could begin becoming someone new. Not by rejecting who I was, but by expanding beyond him. Yet, there was one final piece I hadn't fully faced. A realization that didn't come from therapy, or conversations, or reflection. It came from a moment I didn't expect. A moment that forced me to decide what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not just for my son, but for myself. It took me a long time to realize that the hardest part of healing wasn't understanding my father. It wasn't even forgiving myself. It was deciding what I wanted to carry forward. For decades, I had watched pain ripple quietly through generations. From my grandfather to my father, and from my father to me. The patterns were subtle but persistent. Fear hiding as control, silence hiding as protection, distance hiding as love. I didn't want to pass that to my son. But understanding it didn't automatically give me the tools to change. Change required courage. Courage I wasn't sure I had. One evening, after putting my son to bed, I sat alone in his room. The room smelled faintly of crayons and freshly washed sheets. Toys were scattered across the floor in an innocent, careless way. I watched him sleep for a long time, tiny chest rising and falling, little hands curled in sleep. I felt a wave of both love and responsibility unlike anything I had ever felt. I realized that everything I had experienced, every silence, every misunderstanding, every fear, was leading me to this moment, to the choice I had to make. I had to commit fully to being different. Not perfect, not fearless, but present, honest, open. That commitment began with a simple recognition. The cycle only ends when you confront it directly. When you refuse to hide from the parts of yourself that were shaped by pain. The next day, I started small. I began noticing moments in ordinary life where I could be fully present. When my son asked me questions about school, I didn't give perfunctory answers. I listened. I asked follow-ups. I laughed at his jokes, even when they were corny. I let him see me excited, frustrated, happy, or confused. With my wife, I began sharing what I was learning about myself. I told her about my conversations with my father. about the patterns I recognized in myself, about the guilt I still carried. She didn't judge. She didn't lecture. She listened, and she offered her own vulnerability in return. It wasn't easy. It was terrifying at times. Old habits die slowly. Fear doesn't vanish overnight. Some nights, I wanted to retreat into silence because it was comfortable, safe, predictable. But comfort wasn't the same as love, and I wanted love to define my home. I began having daily moments of reflection. I would ask myself, am I being honest? Am I being present? Am I acknowledging my feelings? Am I acknowledging theirs? Sometimes the answer was no. And when it was no, I would take the opportunity to course correct, to try again. I also realized that breaking cycles wasn't just about my home. It was about how I interacted with the world. I noticed how easy it had been to avoid emotional risk in friendships, in professional relationships, in casual interactions. And I began practicing being more genuine everywhere. One afternoon, my father called. I could hear the subtle relief in his voice when he said, "I wanted to tell you. I saw how you were with your son the other day. It meant a lot to me." It wasn't praise. Not exactly. But it was acknowledgement. Recognition that the efforts I was making mattered, even to him. It made me realize that legacy isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, intentional choices made consistently over time. It's about showing up for the people in your life in ways that are honest and meaningful. I started noticing subtle shifts in my household. My son was more expressive. He shared little victories and frustrations without hesitation. My wife smiled more often, not because I was perfect, but because I was trying. She saw me being brave, and it encouraged her own openness. We laughed more. We argued less destructively. We handled disappointment with dialogue instead of silence. I felt the impact of this intentional change ripple through our lives. It was slow, imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but real. One day, I caught myself thinking about my father, the man he had been, the man he had become, the truth he finally shared. And I understood something crucial. The cycle could have continued. The patterns could have repeated. But it didn't have to. Because someone had the courage to confront the past. Someone had the courage to feel, to be honest, and to try something different. And that someone could be me. It became clear that the legacy I wanted to leave wasn't wealth, or status, or recognition. It was presence. It was honesty. It was the knowledge that love is active, not passive. That love requires courage. That love sometimes means being uncomfortable, exposed, and vulnerable. I realized I wanted my son to grow up seeing a man who can fail and admit it. A man who can be scared but still choose to act with love. A man who can experience anger, disappointment, and frustration and still stay committed to connection. I wanted him to know that silence is not strength. Communication, honesty, and empathy are. And as I watched him run around the yard one afternoon, laughing without a care, I felt a deep sense of purpose. I wasn't perfect. I would make mistakes. But the intentional choices I made mattered. They could shape a better version of our family than the one I had grown up in. That evening, my father visited. He watched me interact with my son, quietly observing. When I walked inside, he said something I didn't expect. "You've done something I never managed to do," he said softly. "You're showing him how to feel without fear." I felt a lump in my throat. "It's not perfect," I replied. "But I'm trying." "That's enough," he said. And in that moment, I understood that what we leave behind isn't measured by what we say, or what we earn, or what we achieve. It's measured by the hearts we touch, the courage we model, the cycles we choose to break. I began to see my father not only as a man shaped by trauma, but also as someone whose efforts, even imperfect ones, had allowed me to recognize my own path. I realized that healing isn't linear. It isn't about forgetting the past. It's about using it to shape a better present. That evening, as I watched my son asleep once more, I silently made a promise. I would continue to show up. I would continue to try. I would continue to confront the parts of myself that are afraid, distant, or closed off. Not for anyone else. Not for perfection. But for the family I love. And in doing so, I finally understood what my father had tried to teach me all along. Strength isn't in silence. Strength is in presence. Strength is in love, even when it's messy, imperfect, and uncomfortable. The relationship between my father and me didn't change overnight. It couldn't. Decades of distance, silence, and unspoken pain aren't erased with a single conversation. They take time, patience, and courage, the kind that doesn't always feel comfortable. After that day in the kitchen, I began visiting him more often. Not for answers anymore, not seeking closure or explanation, but for connection. We started small. Sometimes, we would sit in silence. Not the tense, uncomfortable silence of my childhood, but a quiet companionship that felt safe. I would read in one chair. He would read in another. Or we'd watch a game together, talking about the plays rather than the people. Simple things, seemingly trivial. But for the first time, I realized that these small moments were building a bridge. Other times, we would talk. Not about guilt, not about pain, but about life, work, memories, and lessons. He would share stories I had never heard before. The struggles he faced as a young man starting out on his own. The dreams he had quietly carried. The mistakes he had made and learned from. It was humbling. I realized the man I had often judged silently, my father, had carried his own burdens silently, and his efforts to survive had inadvertently shaped the man I had become. One afternoon, we worked in his garage. He was fixing an old lawnmower. I was helping hold tools. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. We didn't talk much at first, just moved together in quiet coordination. But then he paused and looked at me. "You've changed," he said simply. Not as a judgment, not as praise, but as an observation. "You listen differently now. You see things differently." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "Yes," I said. "I'm trying. Harder than I ever thought I could." He smiled. A genuine, soft smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said. "Keep trying. That's what matters." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said in years. Our conversation slowly began to dig deeper, not into blame or pain, but into understanding. I learned that his silence wasn't always fear. Sometimes it was protection. He had wanted to shield us from the anger he had inherited, from the pain he had seen, from mistakes he feared repeating. And now, watching him as an adult, I could see the magnitude of what he had carried. One evening, my son asked me why Grandpa never raised his voice. I realized then how much my father's own efforts had shaped my parenting in ways I hadn't fully understood. His silence had taught me caution. His control had taught me patience. But it had also taught me fear. And now, I was trying to unlearn that fear, piece by piece. As my father and I spent more time together, I noticed subtle changes in him too. He was more relaxed around me. He laughed more easily. He asked questions, and this time he really listened to my answers. And when he spoke, he shared feelings I had never heard, admitting vulnerability without shame. I remember one rainy afternoon, sitting on his porch, watching the drops slide down the glass. We were talking about life, not the past, not regrets, but hopes, dreams, things we wanted to do before it was too late. "I wish I had traveled more when I was young," he said. "Not just for fun, but to see the world with fresh eyes." I nodded. "It's never too late," I said. He looked at me, a quiet challenge in his eyes. "You mean we could go?" he asked. I smiled. Yes, we could. It felt symbolic. Not just about travel, but about reclaiming lost time. About making memories now, instead of dwelling on what couldn't be changed. Through these visits, I began to see that reconciliation isn't about erasing pain. It's about acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing connection over distance. And connection can take many forms. A shared meal, a project in the garage, a quiet conversation, a simple "I'm proud of you." All of these things became our new vocabulary for love. One night, after dinner, my father leaned back in his chair. "I never thought I'd say this," he said slowly, "but I'm glad you came to see me that day. That night in the kitchen." I nodded. "Me too." He looked at me, eyes soft. It gave me a chance to be seen, to speak without fear, to reconnect, even at my age. I realized then that he had been waiting for permission all along. Permission to be vulnerable. Permission to be human. Permission to let go of the walls he had built decades ago. "Thank you, Dad," I said, "for trying, even when it was hard." He reached out and put his hand over mine. A simple touch, but it carried years of unspoken words. Years of regret, love, and hope. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Reconciliation doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. It doesn't remove pain. It redefines it. It allows two people, broken in different ways, to find each other again. Over the next months, our bond grew. We still had disagreements, of course. Old habits die slowly. He still retreated at times, and I still stumbled through moments of fear or uncertainty. But now, when those moments happened, they became opportunities. Opportunities to connect, to understand, to repair. I saw him more clearly than ever before. Not as the distant man who raised me, not as the flawed father I had resented in moments of anger, but as a human being, shaped by his past, striving in his own imperfect way to be better. And I began to see myself more clearly too, not as a man doomed to repeat the same patterns, but as someone capable of learning, adapting, and choosing love over fear. Reconnecting with my father taught me that the cycles we inherit don't have to define us. They can inform us, they can guide us, but they don't have to control the way we live, the way we love, or the way we parent. And slowly, quietly, I began to feel hope. Hope that my son would inherit more presence than distance. Hope that my marriage would grow stronger through honesty. Hope that the legacy of my family could be rewritten, not by erasing the past, but by choosing a better way forward. That hope, I realized, was a gift, not given by chance, but earned through courage, through honesty, through connection. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in it fully. After reconnecting with my father, I started to see my own life differently. I realized that understanding him and forgiving myself weren't abstract exercises. They were tools I could use to shape a better family for my son and my wife. I wanted my son to feel safe not only physically, but emotionally. I wanted him to know that his feelings mattered, that they could be expressed without fear, and that mistakes weren't the end of the world. They were opportunities to learn. The change didn't happen overnight. It came in small moments, tiny victories and setbacks that accumulated over months. One morning, my son came running into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, I got picked for the soccer team." In the past, I might have just said, "That's great. Good job," and gone back to my coffee. But now I stopped. I knelt down to his level. I asked him how he felt about it. I listened, really listened. And when he described the nervousness he felt before the tryouts, I acknowledged it, naming the fear for him and letting him know it was normal to feel that way. He hugged me tightly, laughing, his little chest pressing against mine. It was such a small moment, but to me, it felt monumental. I realized then that being present emotionally wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up fully, consistently, in the ordinary moments of life. With my wife, I began practicing honesty in ways I had avoided for decades. Not only about struggles or mistakes, but about feelings, joy, fear, frustration, even vulnerability. One evening, after putting our son to bed, I found myself talking to her about something I had never shared. "I feel scared sometimes," I admitted. "Scared that I'll mess up, scared that I'll repeat my father's mistakes." Her hand found mine. "You're not him," she said softly. "You're doing something different. And that's enough." Her words weren't a shield from my fear. They were a reminder that love doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. It demands courage. It demands willingness to be imperfect in front of someone else. I started noticing the little ways my son mirrored my behavior. When he faced frustration, he looked to me, waiting to see how I would respond. When he made mistakes, he didn't hide. He asked for help. And when he saw me make mistakes, he saw me own them. One day, he accidentally broke a school project we had worked on together. In the past, I might have hidden irritation behind calm words or a sharp tone. Instead, I knelt beside him. We looked at the pieces together, and I said, "It's okay. Mistakes happen. Let's figure out how to fix it." We rebuilt it together, laughing at our missteps along the way. I realized then that parenting isn't just about teaching skills. It's about modeling resilience, empathy, and patience. At home, the atmosphere began to shift. My wife and I argued less destructively. We learned to speak directly about our needs, to apologize quickly when we failed, and to listen without judgment. The house felt warmer. Not perfect, but alive. Full of connection. Full of the kind of love that requires courage to maintain. I also began to see my own internal patterns more clearly. Whenever I felt the urge to retreat into work, avoid conversation, or shut down emotionally, I paused. I asked myself, am I choosing fear or love? Am I staying silent, or am I present? It wasn't always easy. Some days, fear felt stronger than courage. Some days, silence felt safer. But with each conscious choice to act differently, I felt myself growing stronger. Not in control, but in presence. Not in perfection, but in authenticity. The lessons from my father stayed with me. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness. I learned that love isn't measured by absence of mistakes, but by the willingness to stay committed despite them. I learned that courage isn't about grand heroic acts. It's about showing up in ordinary moments, over and over again, even when it's uncomfortable. One Saturday afternoon, my son and I built a treehouse in the backyard. It was messy. Hammering didn't go perfectly. Nails bent. Wood splintered. But every mistake was a chance to teach him problem-solving, patience, and the value of persistence. At the end of the day, we stood back and looked at our creation. It was far from perfect, but it was ours. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, feeling a deep sense of pride, not for what we built, but for the time we shared and the lessons embedded in every mistake and triumph. That evening, I sat with my wife on the porch, watching the sun set. We didn't need words. The laughter of our son playing echoed in the yard. I felt the peace that comes from living in alignment with values. The peace that comes from choosing courage over fear, presence over absence, connection over isolation. I understood then that parenting, like healing, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. Every day, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when fear whispers that it's safer to retreat. I realized that every small, intentional choice I made created a ripple. Ripples that would extend into my son's future. Ripples that could break generational patterns of silence, fear, and emotional distance. And in that moment, I felt a profound gratitude. Gratitude for my father. Not because his choices were perfect, but because his courage to finally speak gave me the tools to try differently. Gratitude for my wife, for her patience, understanding, and unwavering presence. Gratitude for my son, for reminding me daily that love is active, not passive. I knew that challenges would continue. Life would throw obstacles. Emotions would test me. But I also knew that I had begun the work to be the father, husband, and man I always wanted to be. It was no longer about avoiding mistakes or pain. It was about responding to them with honesty, compassion, and courage. And that, I realized, was the legacy I truly wanted to leave behind. Not perfection, not control, but presence, love, understanding, and the courage to face life's difficulties without hiding. Time has a strange way of teaching lessons, often quietly, sometimes painfully, but always persistently. As I sit here now, reflecting on the journey from my father's confessions to the life I am building today, I realize just how far I have come. It hasn't been easy. Some days were heavy with guilt, fear, and doubt. Some nights were long with regret and anxiety, wondering if I could ever truly break the patterns I inherited. But here I am, still standing, still learning, still showing up. I think about my father, the man he was when I was a boy, the man he became when I confronted him about his past, the man he is now, open, vulnerable, human. I see him in myself in so many ways. The same caution, the same fear, the same tendency to retreat into silence when life feels overwhelming. But I also see how far I've come in responding differently, making conscious choices instead of repeating old cycles. I see the boy I once was, the one who learned to hide feelings, to internalize fear, to solve problems quietly without help. And I am proud that I have taught him something new, that vulnerability is not weakness, that sharing feelings is not danger, that mistakes are not failure. I think about my son, the little person who looks to me not just for guidance, but for reassurance that emotions can be expressed, that love can be active, that mistakes are opportunities to grow. I think about how my daily choices shape him more than I ever realized. Every time I kneel down to listen, every time I acknowledge my own mistakes, every time I apologize or laugh or cry with him, I am teaching him what it means to be human, what it means to love, and what it means to be brave. I think about my wife, the anchor of our family, the patient observer of my growth, the one who stayed even when my silence created distance. Her willingness to love me despite my flaws has been one of the most powerful catalysts for change in my life. And her example, her emotional honesty, her courage to speak, her compassion, has been a mirror reflecting who I want to be. Through all of this, I have learned something profound. The past shapes us. It teaches us. It warns us. But it does not have to define us. The patterns of fear, silence, and emotional distance that once dictated my life can be recognized, understood, and transformed. They can be broken, not erased. but consciously replaced with choices rooted in presence, love, and courage. I understand now that forgiveness is at the center of this transformation. Forgiveness of others. Forgiveness of those who hurt us, intentionally or not. Forgiveness of parents who did the best they could with the tools they had. And forgiveness of ourselves. The hardest one. Forgiving myself for the times I failed, for the moments I was absent, for the years I allowed fear to control my actions. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a practice. It's a decision made again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable or undeserved. And it has the power to free us, not by changing the past, but by allowing us to live fully in the present. I also realize that love is an active choice. It's more than words. It's more than gestures. It's showing up consistently, even when it's hard. It's being present for the people we care about, even when we feel fear, doubt, or exhaustion. It's staying connected when silence would be easier. It's acknowledging pain without letting it define us. I have seen how these choices ripple outward. In my marriage, in my parenting, in my relationship with my father. Small, intentional acts of love and presence create lasting impact. They create a new legacy, one that doesn't repeat the pain of the past. And in embracing this life, I have discovered a quiet joy I never knew before. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't always feel momentous, but it is real. It is steady. It is present. I know I will still make mistakes. I know I will still retreat at times. But I also know that the work of presence, honesty, and courage is ongoing. And that is enough. Sometimes, when I see my father, we share a quiet look that carries decades of unspoken understanding. No words are needed. The lessons are mutual. The respect is earned. I can see the relief in his eyes that someone broke the cycle. And I can feel gratitude that the man who once feared connection has finally allowed it. Through me, through us. I think about the future now differently. I think about my son growing up with the knowledge that love requires courage. I think about the conversations we will continue to have, the mistakes we will navigate together, the joys we will share. And I feel hope. Real hope. Not naive hope. Not wishful thinking. But the hope born from action, from awareness, from intention. This journey has taught me that life isn't about perfection. It's about learning, growing, and choosing love despite fear. It's about taking the lessons of the past and consciously deciding to respond differently. It's about being present, fully and honestly, in the ordinary moments that matter most. And I have learned that it is never too late. Never too late to reconcile. Never too late to forgive. Never too late to break cycles. Never too late to choose presence, courage, and love over fear and silence. As I watch my son play, my wife beside me, and my father smiling quietly in his chair, I realize this is what it feels like to live fully. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but fully. And I am grateful. Grateful for the past that taught me, for the present that challenges me, and for the future that I can shape through conscious choices. The life I choose now is not defined by fear, by silence, or by pain. It is defined by courage, by honesty, by love. And that, I believe, is the most meaningful legacy anyone can leave.